Ben or Jay, I'm just like, God, where did you guys lose me again? All right. So anyway, so this thing, it's I mean, really, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to figure out. So this whole project is that I'm trying to use things that are not like framework specific so that we can use RxJS to build really cool things. So we can be like, oh, look, multiplex WebSockets. Oh, look, you can do drag and drop with Rx. Like, oh, look, you can do all these things. So we're taking things that are like kind of unfamiliar, like not using Angular material, not using React's material UI, things like that, and then just playing with things. So, um, anyways, and then just using like RX and different things like that. But what's your specialty?
So my background is pretty heavily in React and Redux, but also full stack development in JavaScript with Node.js. I've been doing some work more recently with GraphQL and having that as a layer on top of disparate microservices.
Yeah.
So I've been doing a lot of that lately.
So like, I have a question. So I have this thing built, and I don't know if you want to like, I mean, it's pretty there's only like, what, three, let's see how many components I have. I think I only have one, two, yeah, I only have the app component, and then this, just this card right here. And then on the card, I mean, actually, all of this does not actually matter. I don't actually care about those things. But like, then, there's the line graph thing, which I'm like trying to understand better, this D3 thing, and wading through it, which you can see that's happening right there.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, can we do things like, how would I, for example, update the state? So right now on the line graph, and tell me if I'm crazy. Honestly, this is just like exploration, right? It's just that I want to like do things to understand React a little bit better. So like, for example, the stroke right now is blue, right?
Right.
But how do I do something to, every time it ticks, so where is the ticker? So the ticker is right here-ish somewhere, right? Like every time it ticks, it changes colors. Like it'll go like red, orange, yellow, green, blue. Like, is that a good way to like, a good example of how to update state in a cool way? Or is that crazy?
That wouldn't be I mean, it would look nice, but that's not incredibly difficult. The hardest thing about that would simply be writing a function that kicks out the next color. But again, anything that's in that render function can be completely driven by your prompts and your state. So if you're just doing it between two colors, for instance, then you could just, I'm looking at this. So data here, is that an array of values?
So data is coming from, this, I think. Yeah, so like, basically it's like this fake WebSocket thing that's using RxJS interval to like get a random integer and then use the date, And then every time, like every 500 milliseconds, it updates state and adds to the data array.
Yeah. Okay. So, for instance, if we jump back to the SVG for a second, let's just take a simple example.
Yeah.
Let's say you wanted it to switch between just blue and red.
Okay.
So you could actually set the stroke equal to a ternary expression and say, and this is just an example, you could say that, data.length mod 2, and then do a ternary for blue and red. So essentially what you're saying is When there's an even number of data elements, make it blue. When there's an odd number of data elements, make it red. And that would automatically create some back and forth for you.
Why is that cooler than the function?
I'm not saying it necessarily is. I'm just giving a simple example of how you could get that working relatively simply. So if you wanted to do it, more in a more complex fashion, you would essentially break out that ternary into a larger function, and you could just say, data.length mod 6, then make it orange, mod 5, make it blue, mod 4, make it red. So you could just add more options instead of just toggling between two.
Okay, let's write it. So can we do the ternary thing first? How do we do that? Does it have to be in this or no?
It does. It has to be in the square bracket. So you can say data.length mod 2.
Mod. What's mod?
It's a percent sign.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Percent sign and then 2. So we're saying divide by 2 and give us the remainder.
Wait, is it like this? Divided by 2?
Yeah, so you can actually put a space in between the percent sign and the 2 as well.
Okay.
Yeah, so right there we're saying take data.length and divide it by 2 would give us the remainder, not the actual result.
So how do I say that?
So it's been said right there. So now we can do a question mark to go ahead and start adding the results for our ternary. So now you can go put the string blue in quotes. Yep. And then do the colon.
Cool. Okay.
And then we can put the string red.
Okay. So I do a space right here.
Yep, just like that. So this is are you familiar with ternary expressions?
I mean, yes, but it's not like I'm great at writing them, obviously.
Not a problem at all. So what it's doing is it's just every time, it's basically toggling back and forth between the two.
Oh, it's so pretty. Okay. But you can't, can you do, I mean, it's ternary, right? So you can't do like, can you do like black?
Nope. So a ternary has a single, basically a single truth check, and it has a true statement and a false statement, which is where the blue and the red come in.
Okay. So
what we want to do is we want to extrapolate that out into a larger function that allows us to have more colors.
So like so I can just stick it up here, right? Or should I stick it down here?
You can actually stick it. Because we're not going to be depending on the props at all, you can actually stick it outside the component. This could be its own separate function that can have its own unit test.
So I just put it up here? Or,
yep.
Okay. So I could be like, make rainbow.
Sure.
And then, oops. And then what would the...
Yeah, we're going to need a single input, and that's going to be...
Am I just, like, failing here? What's wrong? What did I do? Maybe not. Why is it complaining? It doesn't like me. Why?
You may just have to put the function keyword in front of make rainbow.
Oh, okay. Is that because it's outside of the... Is that because it's outside of the component? Outside
exactly.
Of the class?
So we're actually just writing kind of a vanilla JavaScript function right here.
Okay.
So we're going to need an input value, so we can just call that length. Although is length's not a reserved keyword, is it? I don't think so. We'll actually have that as the single argument to the function.
Got it.
Yep. And then now we're going to do a whole bunch of nested if statements. Or not nested, but rather in series, a whole bunch of if statements. So if length...
Should I go do this, or do I have to do this? Length.
It'll have to be, length. It'll have to be inside the parentheses. Okay. Length, and then we'll do the percent sign again because we're going to check a mod. So we'll do if length mod. How many different colors do you want this to cycle through?
Like red, orange, yellow, green, blue. 5.
5. Okay, so we'll do length mod 5. Mm-hmm. That actually will all have to be inside the parentheses.
Oh, sorry. Mm-hmm.
Yep, length mod 5. And then we can just return the string blue.
Okay, so return blue.
Yep. So let's, just to make sure this is actually working, let's just add one more statement, and we'll just, if that if is not, we can just add a return after that closing brace, and we'll just return red. So if we did this correctly, we're about to apply this down in the render function, but if we did this correctly, what we're going to see is that red will be there 4 out of 5 ticks, and blue will be there for 1 of those out of every 5 ticks.
Okay, so how do I do that? Do I just say make rainbow here?
Make rainbow, and then we're going to pass in data.length as the argument.
Did I
And
do
if we
that right?
save that, again, we should see mostly red with a single tick of blue.
Woo! Well, we saw, I guess, the opposite. Blue.
Oh, it's the opposite, so hold on. If length, oh, because if, oh, yeah, if, yep, so it needs to be if length mod 5 equals 0. Yep, so we're saying if it is divisible by 5. So we had it the opposite, if it's not divisible by 5, but we don't, so it needs to be mostly red with 1 blue, and so on and so forth. Exactly. So now we can go ahead and go back to our function and just start adding more if statements. So we can say if length mod 4 equals 0, then return orange.
Ew. Red, orange, yellow. Bet you're jealous I get to do silly things.
I haven't been able to get to have a ton of fun recently, so this is exciting.
Yeah, it's well, you know, it's me too. So every time I get to do this, I'm like, actually, you know, I have to set aside the time to do it, but when I get to do it, I'm like so happy. Okay. So okay, I have another question. How come this damn thing, like, how do I make it confined to something? Like, can I stick this in here? And like, will it stay? Or is it just always just going to be like a...
So that's actually a... No, you're only using D3 to know your data.
Yeah.
So if you stick that inside a container and you set the SVG width to 100%, it should. So right now the SVG width is set to a discrete value, 500 pixels. So if you want to work in terms of percentages, you'd have to add a CSS class. You wouldn't be able to do that because when you add an integer in a width value, it's always pixels. It doesn't accept any other units.
Okay.
So you could add a CSS class and write a little bit of CSS that sets the width to 100%. And I think.
Okay, so we just say like dot graph width. Oh yeah, so is this right for React? Is it capital?
The way that they have it, there's no explicit convention. I personally I don't write vanilla CSS with my React. I use a library called style components, but we don't have to get into that right now. It's a whole other
I do love style components. Well, yeah, we're trying to do it as vanilla as possible so we can just take stuff out and shove it into other frameworks.
Sure. So we want to set a width to 1, and we want to put the percent sign after 100.
Okay.
If there's no unit, I believe the browser defaults to pixels. So by putting the percentage, we're letting them know that it needs to be a percent.
Okay, so I go back to this and I just say class equals
class name with the N capitalized. Yep. So because class is a reserved keyword, React came up with the class name convention.
Dude, switching between frameworks. It's like the small little things, you know? It's like,
Yeah.
how do you do the imports? Is it as, or is it from, or is it what? Yeah, but so okay, so I just did that. Did that work? Oh, like, did it work? No,
it didn't, because the width specification is still there, and that takes priority.
Okay. So
let's see if we just broke everything.
Nope, still working.
Now let's make sure that that class got applied correctly. Interesting. The path is only being drawn. SVG is such a monster.
Yes, it's funny because I was just thinking the word monster and you said it.
Let's go back to our React code really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I think, so on line 40.
Mm-hmm. Line 40,
how do they do this? I want to say, when you're using raw D3, I think D3 has its own utilities to support responsive SVG. So here, if we wanted this, here's what I think we would need to do if we wanted this to work with the full browser window. Essentially, what's being done here is D3 is not going to create lines wider than the width value. So if we wanted to know what that container's width value was, we would actually need to do computations every time the window resizes of that container.
That really sounds like it hurts.
Yeah, and that's how you would do it with D3 on its own. That's how you would do it. I mean, that's how a lot of these SVG libraries with React work. Whenever you have variable widths for your graphs, it has to basically be listening to the window resize event and then update the width accordingly.
Okay, so like, can we do this other thing where like, so here's what I want to do. Can we be like, after every 10 ticks, we get an image to show up from another div? Like, for example, every time it ticks, you know, then like Grumpy Cat shows up right here or something.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is actually going to be fairly trivial to do because your state is being maintained at a higher level than this component. So we would be able to, we actually wouldn't do it in this component. We could write a new one called Grumpy Cat. And
so then another question is, so so the way that this thing has come about is because me and Jay are pairing on this together. So it's like me and Jay and Ben and now you. So like, you know, I'm curious, like, so I mean, he just abstracted out the state, right? And he like, and we're, you know, we're trying not to use like Redux or anything like that, but I mean, abstracting out state doesn't mean anything, right? It just means that like what does that mean in React? Like, does it mean it? Like, are we just doing React, or have we like, I don't think we've gone to the point where we've like implemented the Redux pattern in RX yet.
Yeah, so those are all great questions. So let's just talk vanilla React for a second. I'll try not to be too long-winded here, but pure React, right? The only way to maintain the only way inside of a component to maintain state is component state, right? That's where you can call this dot set state, like you're doing on line 29.
Yeah. Okay.
Right, and the component maintains that itself, right? Well, then the question is, well, what happens once you need state to be shared across multiple components? And the idea to that was, well, let's move that state up higher in the component tree, which is exactly what you've done here, right? The state is being held at the app level and then being passed down to any children that need it.
Here?
Exactly. So if you think about your component tree for a second, app is at the very top. And then you have card, grumpy cat, and line graph as children. And so because more than one of those children will eventually rely on this state, it's appropriate to have it as high up as is needed.
So like in Redux, is that what they do? They just have it like way up here?
Well, actually what Redux does is Redux takes state management completely out of the component and kind of sits it alongside next to your application.
Okay.
And then individual components can hook into that state. But it maintains it outside of React.
Okay.
Actually, I believe there's Redux bindings for Angular. It's framework agnostic. It's just been most heavily adopted in the React space.
Export default class, grumpy cat. Okay. Yeah. Well, there's also NGRX and what is it? Well, NGRX, and then for for side effects, there's NG effects. So, have you ever used Redux Observable, or do you use Redux Saga, or?
I've never used Redux Observables. I've used Redux Sagas, and then I've used another library called Redux Logic, which is, do you know Jeff Gorcheski?
But I've never heard of Redux Logic, which is, I just thought it was like Saga, Thunk, and Observable.
Yeah, well, Logic is a little lesser known. I prefer it over the others, and it's actually built on top of observables. It abstracts that away, so if someone's unfamiliar with observables, like myself, then it's not going to be a problem. You can still use the library.
That's so interesting. What is it called again?
Redux Logic.
Okay, Redux Logic. Okay, I have to remember that because I'm like really curious now. Okay, so Grumpy Cat, no. So I already have a Grumpy, because I'm creating another app with Grumpy Cat. Don't ask questions.
I won't.
But like, okay, so that, wait, where's my, what is this thing called? This thing is called Crypto Dashboard, yes. It's really becoming a crypto dashboard, as you can see. Let's see, public. I know. Paste the item. Okay, so Grumpy Cat. Okay, so now I got my Grumpy Cat in there. Okay. Okay, now what do we do? Do I need to, I need to import the Grumpy Cat, right? So I need to import Grumpy Cat from here.
Actually, we can import it straight into the other component because we're not going to be using it in app. So we'll only import it where we need it to be
Where the line graph is?
Well, no, because we're gonna import it straight into grumpycat.js.
Oh, sorry. No, what I meant was I have to import the component into the main.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. Yes. Yeah, we'll do it. We'll do it in app.
Oops. Okay.
You were completely correct. That's my fault.
So what conferences are you speaking at next?
I'm actually speaking this week at the Connect Tech sister conference down in
New
Orleans, JazzCon.
Yes. Lots of friends will be there.
Cool. Excellent. Yeah, I'm speaking down there. I'm going to be talking on. I'm actually one of the talks is going to be on Redux Logic.
Nice.
And the other one's going to be on Gatsby, which is a static site generator that uses React and GraphQL. Yes.
Okay, so import what? Grumpy cat no.png. Is this okay?
We'll actually have to assign it a variable. So imports. Grumpy cat pick
as from. Yep.
So what that's doing is grumpy cat pick will be the final URL of that file. So we can use that as the source.
Oh, can't. Okay, so I'm putting it in public. Oh, sorry. Dot slash public slash. Is that? Hopefully that's the right URL.
Actually, okay. So if you're putting it in public, actually let's change that. If you drag grumpycat no.png over to your source directory, and just dump it in there,
Is that good convention?
Yeah, so what that does, if you do it that way, it allows Webpack to manage the to manage the image, and so now you can do this import, and you're good.
Okay, what am I doing wrong?
You'll still need the dot at the beginning of you'll have to do /. Yep, just like that.
It's not letting me. Let's see. Or maybe I was just too... Grumpy cat, no.
Grumpy... Oh, there's no Y in
oh, sorry. Linting. Yes, okay.
Not a problem.
Yeah, I thought it'd be so exciting. So one of the talks I want to do is I want to like take this application where, you know, basically all of my logic is in RxJS, and I want to move it from React to Angular to Vue to show people how easy it is and why it's so cool to like use RxJS as an abstraction. But then I was like, I really love live coding during my talks as well. And so, but I'm thinking, anyways, do you see where I'm a hot mess, right? I'm just like,
not a problem at all. If I was doing this in Angular, it would be rough. So you're doing way better in React than I'd be doing in Angular.
Okay, well, that makes me feel a little better. So, which by the way, if you ever need Angular help, so okay, so now what? Now what do I do? I mean, actually, yeah, go ahead.
So now we'll go ahead and add our render method in here, so we can actually show something. So we'll do that, and then let's assume for a second.
Is my return down here, or is it not? Is it in here?
It's in the render method. So when you create a component like this, it's a JavaScript class, and so you don't need a return function or a return statement in a class. You just have methods, and React class components just expect the render one to be there, and then we can return things here in this function.
Okay, got it.
And so here, let's see. Let's go ahead and do a check above the return statement, and we'll say if, and then we'll do some parentheses, and I'll just kind of.
You can just talk it.
Put it out, and then we'll go back through and walk through it. If this dot props dot length mod 10. We'll do the percent sign again. Mod 10 equals 0. Yep. And then after that, inside this if statement, we're gonna add a return. So we can go and do the curly braces, and we'll add a return in the if statement.
Oops.
Yep. And then inside here, we'll say we'll just return an image tag for the moment. Yep, and then we can set. Yep, and then we're going to add one attribute to image. We're going to add the source attribute, src. And that's going to equal curly braces. And in there, we're going to put the grumpy cat pick variable.
Like that?
Just like that. And then outside the if statement, we need to add another return for when that if isn't true, so we can just return null. So in React, returning null is a valid render, and it shows nothing. All right. So now we need to do one last thing. We need to go back to app.js and implement grumpy cat.
Okay, where's my grumpy cat gonna be? Or it's not in line graph that you're doing that?
I mean, you can do that if you want to. I was figuring we would just put it like below the line graph, but if you want to do it inside the line graph component, you could do that as well. Again, you know, components are just how abstracted do I want these things to be? What makes sense to be inside of what?
Grumpy cat. Okay, so I did that, but now do we need to...
One last thing missing.
Yeah.
So we're going to add a property to Grumpy Cat. So we'll say length equals, and then we'll do curly braces, and we'll do data.length. And if we save that, what should happen is that every 10th tick, which I guess will take, 5 seconds?
Grumpy Cat will show up. Oh!
Oh, there it went.
That was exciting. It's
It only sticks around for a second.
I know.
Or actually for 500 milliseconds.
Silliest things ever. So can you explain to me this, like, life makes me so happy. Okay. So, like, oh my God, he's so cute. Okay, I need to stop because I'm like, okay. So, okay, can you explain to me this whole thing why is everything always in curly braces?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're writing JSX, which is the syntax here inside the return statement, when you're writing that syntax, static values you can just write as strings, right? So we see a lot of class names are just static strings.
Right.
But anytime you have a dynamic value, so meaning you're referencing a variable, it has to be in the curly braces.
Okay, and then when we say data.length, this is just JavaScript.length, right? Like if data has a length.
Correct. We're assuming that this .state.data is always going to be an array.
Okay. And
We're
then
making that assumption.
you know how, so like, let's see. Okay, so const data, because this, if we hadn't destructured this out, it would be like this .state.data.length, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. And then, okay, yeah, this is totally crazy to me, this whole, like, thing where you, like, import and then source is this. That's cool. That's super cool.
Yeah, and that's actually not React. That's going to be one of the powers of Webpack.
Oh.
Which is one of the most used bundler in the React ecosystem. There are a few others, and a lot of them have loading images like that, but Webpack's the most common one.
Oh, so like that's why. So basically, what everybody does in React is everybody sticks their images in the source folder, so that they can utilize React to do these image imports and stuff.
It's actually going to be Webpack that handles that. And then what happens is that when the bundle is fully created, Webpack will copy all those images into the build directory, but it gives it all. It gives all the images like hashed names, and then injects those hashed names into the code.
So, do you want to teach me something else exciting?
Sure.
All right, your pick.
What else are you wanting to look at for the demo?
I don't know. I'm not really sure. We had a list of things, but maybe you can help with. No, it's too hard. It's too hard. I was like, maybe you can help with this API, but I'm like, oh God. We were
Is it the drag and drop API?
No, it's the it's this other API. Hold on, crypto. It's this it's this like coin API, but it's not. Yeah, so these are the things we want to do basically. Actually, we're not even using we're using the draggable API, but we're like super, like it's like, I mean, we literally spent like 4 hours on it. I mean, I don't know. We decided like this is not a good use of our time to spend 4 more hours on it.
Yeah, drag and drop is really hard.
Yeah, I mean, like the drag and drop implementation is actually not that hard. It's like getting, so where is it? Okay. So like basically when you drag over here, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get this to drag and then somehow, you know, that to move over there. But when you're dragging, it's not dragging the full, you know, this full piece right here, it's just dragging into like this part or like the button. It's not, you see what I'm saying? So we don't know if it's like because, you know, material component is not working for, anyways, it's just, it's painful, but that's okay. Yeah, we're trying to do all these things like drag and drop, look ahead search, like the multiplex WebSockets, which is kind of why we're trying to do the whole like use the coin API. We're trying to do animations, making things pretty. That's me. Exponential backup, like how to do back pressure with it, you know, and then like how like you can utilize arts like cancellation and why it's super awesome with ReactJS. So I mean, I think like Jay really cares about this back pressure thing, and I'm like, okay, you know. And then these two things are Jay excitement. This stuff I've kind of done already, but I'm trying to implement it in React and like with like, yeah. I mean, you know, I understand a lot of things, and then I don't understand a lot of things. And so part of my not understanding a lot of things, a lot of it is just like, I think sometimes basic JavaScript is like, you know, like ES6 stuff doesn't bother me, but then like other things, you know, I mean, you know how it is. So,
yeah, for sure. And with the React ecosystem, you know, a lot of people, you know, there's the bundlers to learn things like Webpack, like that importing that image. A lot of people assume that Redux is kind of part and parcel with React when it's not. So there's all these other things that kind of come along with React when people first get started.
Yeah. Well, what else do you think I should learn in React? Like, what are some other really like basic things? Like, can I set state with something else, or like, did we set state? I mean, I guess we added something. Like, what did we do here? We added another piece of state that we updated. Is that what we did?
No, we just added another consumer to our state. So the only thing setting the, and this is kind of a React idea, or it's one of the ideas that Redux implements, and it kind of came out of Facebook alongside of React, is what they call unidirectional data flow. Have you ever heard anyone talk about that in terms of React?
I've definitely heard that buzzword before.
Okay, so there's no two-way data bindings typically. I mean, there are a few libraries that implement it, but you know, if you're using Redux or if you're using component state like we're doing here, there's no two-way data bindings. So when we're passing data down into line graph can't mutate that at all. All it can do is read it. It's just consuming it. The only way for us to mutate data is by calling this.setState at this level. So that helps create a separation of concerns, because we know now that LineGraph and GrumpyCat are only going to be consumers of our data.
Okay, so LineGraph and GrumpyCat are consumers of our data, and we're basically, we're only setting state in the app component.
Correct.
Okay. And that's how typically, that's like typically how you should be setting up. That's like the best convention of how you should be setting up your application.
Yeah, for simply, once you get to really big applications, then that's a whole different conversation of how to handle state, and that's where conversations like Redux start coming into play. But something like this, yeah, just and the term you may hear is lifting the state up as high as it needs to be, which in this case is this app component.
Yeah. Okay, and then how do we get like GrumpyCat to stay like after? Is it
so you want it to not show up until, so you want it to show up once it hits 10 and stay permanently?
Yeah,
you can just do, I mean, again, you can do this.Hopstop length greater than or equal to 10.
greater than or equal to 10. Come on, GrumpyCat, I want you. And then how could, no.
Well, that says less than or equal
Oh,
to.
sorry. I failed. I failed at life. Okay. Greater
The
than or equal to
Hopstop
10.
length is greater than or equal to 10. We'll let that refresh. 2, 3, 4. Was that 8? 9. Yeah, and then it'll stay.
Grumpy cat. You're so cute. Okay. Well, cool. This is so helpful.
Yeah, I mean, so the JSX, kind of the HTML looking syntax, throws a lot of people because it looks like HTML in JavaScript, even though it's not. But pretty much everything else in React is, I mean, there's obviously some conventions and things, but they try to keep it as much raw JavaScript as possible. So that's why we can use if statements, we can use data.length, we can use all these regular JavaScript conventions.
I mean, I definitely feel like if you're doing React, so some people say, like, oh, get started with React. React is so easy. But I kind of feel like you really have to be good at JavaScript to really utilize React really well. And so, like, if you're like, if you're really good at JavaScript and then doing React, then it's great. But then I guess when people are really good at JavaScript and they switch over to something like, let's say, Angular or Ember, then because it's less just JavaScript, then they feel like the burden of like having to learn the convention of how, like Angular or Ember does something. Maybe that's the...
Yeah, I know for me, because I've looked at Angular, 1.x. I haven't done too much with Angular 2 and beyond. I've looked at Ember. The templating for me in those languages was always kind of hard to get used to because it was all its own template. Like each one had their own templating language, and that was always kind of difficult because I'm like, okay, which convention does this have? Which convention does this have? And with the exception of it being written more in HTML style, JSX is still JavaScript. I can map over an array. I can do a ternary expression. I can have an if statement. Those sorts of things. So for me, because I know JavaScript decently well, JSX feels like a more natural, or maybe I'll say a thinner abstraction, right? Because there's still a little bit of abstraction, right?
Yeah.
But it feels thinner than some of the templating engines for Ember or Angular or what have you.
So I have one last question that I think I'm not really understanding, or I think I'm just I think I need it explained again. So now, okay, so if I'm creating a header, for example, right? I have a render function, right? And then I'm going to have return, right? Or something. And so like do I just, so how do I do this and then just, like, where do I write my divs and stuff? I write my divs over here, but I guess, like, what am I putting in? So, like, if you look at this, you have, stuff here and then stuff there. You get what I'm saying?
Okay, so yeah, that's a great question. So you're only going to, when you're in the render function, you're only going to return JSX, or like null, like we did for Grumpy Cat. So that's when you can start writing things like that. You can put text in there and what have you. Above the return statement, but still inside the render method, is where we could define a variable. We could do some computation, things like that.
So, like, what's a good example here?
Well, if you ever want to do some destructuring, you can do it here. And that's what you're doing in app.js, right? You're destructuring data out of this .state. So you could do some destructuring here to get things this .props.
Or like, I guess I can like, so if I have a header and I want it to, you know, be like a rectangle over here, is that where I would put stuff here and then just return something else? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, is that kind of how I would use it?
I'm sorry, I don't think I understand that question.
Like, let's say I wanted a rectangle or I wanted a div. I guess I could just, I mean, maybe that's a class thing, but I could be like style equals height 100, color equals whatever. Maybe that's not a good example of what I would put here. I guess I'm just trying to understand like why this is, like how these two interact with each other.
Okay, so really, I mean, typically you shouldn't have too much logic in your render function. Okay. They suggest that your render function should be really small, really thin. I mean, it should mostly be your return statement. The only logic you should really have in your render function is maybe a little bit of conditional logic for displaying something or not, which is exactly what's happening here, right? We're determining a specific style based on some state, right? So that could be appropriate for the render function. But your render function shouldn't have a ton of logic in it to begin with. In fact, in most of the applications that I write, the render function has almost no logic in it. I would say probably 80% of the components that I write have zero logic in the render function. It's just the return statement with the JSX.
So where would you put this then, typically?
Well, here it's appropriate. Here it is appropriate. I'm just saying, in a lot of contexts, there's just you don't need a lot of logic.
So then what about the, okay, so where were we? So we're at that, and then we're at I think we're at the line graph. Yeah. Okay, so, well, actually, where did we create that? Maybe we created it in app.js. No, where did we create that function?
That was in line graph, the very top of line graph.
Okay, it was in line graph. Okay. So, like, can you explain to me again why we created it outside of the class? Like, why is that better than creating it inside the class? Is it just so you can use it globally?
So, a few things. I mean, we don't have to create it outside the class. Mm-hmm. We could create it inside the class. Pulling it outside the class, I tend to be a little more functional in how I write my JavaScript and less object-oriented. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's definitely a preference. I find having, when code doesn't have to be inside a component, I keep it out. That way I can unit test it easier. If I need to pull it out of that file because multiple components need to use it, I can stick it in like a utils directory, things like that. So that's why I typically keep them outside of the component. Mm-hmm. There are times when it is appropriate to keep functions inside a component, and that would be when the function strictly depends on something in the component, right? Their state or the props. Mm-hmm. But because we can pass in a single value and get a single value back here, to me it makes more sense to keep it outside of the component.
Okay.
That could just be personal preference too, because like I said, I'm more partial to the functional style of programming.
So what's the difference between like what makes this functional and putting it in the class not functional?
So I mean, putting it in the class doesn't inherently make it less functional, but the idea behind functional programming, and I'm gonna, this is not a formal definition.
Okay.
But you think in terms of functions. You think in terms of how can I pass values through functions to kind of get from where I start to where I need to end. And one of the big aspects of that is what's called a pure function, which means a function has no side effects. Mm-hmm. You pass everything in to the function that it needs when you call it, and then it returns a a value based on that. And the idea behind a pure function is you should be able to call a pure function with the same input and always get the same output. Make rainbow is an example of this. Mm-hmm. If we call make rainbow with 5, we will get red every time. Mm-hmm. It's not depending on anything external. Mm-hmm. Whereas perhaps a function that's inside the component class, it may depend on this dot props, which is outside of the function, but it's still needing to reference it. So in that case, it's not a pure function anymore. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So and again, that's a very minimal discussion, and by no means am I a functional programming expert. I am just slowly making my way into it. But
I love it.
For me, it helps me kind of think through and organize the code a little bit easier.
Cool. Awesome.